May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Have you noticed that there's a lot of boating going on in the gospel lately? Last week, Jesus took a boat alone to the other side of the Sea of Galilee to be by himself, and yet everyone followed him there. And this week, he sends the disciples ahead of him in the boat back across to the other side. There's something about the sea. Something about the sea that is strange and mysterious and frightening. The Sea of Galilee is really just a big lake. There's nowhere where you can stand on the seashore on a clear day and not see the entire shoreline. That being said, for much of the year, it's enshrouded in a thick fog. It's also one of the deepest lakes in the world. The geography around it can turn its glassy, still waters into a raging sea with little to no warning. The Sea of Galilee, with its veil of fog that distorts what we see, its unpredictability, it makes it a great metaphor for life itself. It's not so difficult for us to imagine what it must have been like for the disciples on that night as they were crossing the Sea of Galilee. We need only to think about the storms that have raged in our own lives to get an idea of what the disciples were facing. We've all faced those times when our lives were drenched in fog and darkness. That sort of darkness we experience in the last couple of hours of the night, right before the dawn, when we can't see our hand in front of our face. The sort of darkness that prevents us from knowing what's in front of us. It keeps us guessing when we'll arrive at the other shore. That's the sort of darkness that gets our mind racing. When we feel like we're drowning in the sort of fear that such darkness produces, when we begin to see ghosts of all sorts, when we know that there's something else out there with us, something that our rational mind easily dismisses. This is the sort of darkness that activates our irrational minds. And when we're certain that something's going to get us, perhaps ghosts aren't real, but that sort of fear certainly is. Think back for a moment on those days when the winds of change were blowing against us, and no matter what we did, no matter how hard we tried to row the boat, we didn't get anywhere. Think back to those times when the events and circumstances of life battered us around like the unruly sea, tossing a boat about, waves washing over its bow. We experience storms in all sorts of different ways, striking individuals and families, nations, and the world, even the church. They may be the storms of illness or divorce, of systemic racism, or social unrest, or pandemic, or war. I think we can all tell our stories about how our lives have been blown off course, when the structures of our lives were washed away, when our hopes and dreams were damaged and destroyed. And I also think that it's part of our human nature that whenever these storms of life arise, so do our questions of faith. Do we have faith? Do we have the right kind of faith? Do we have enough faith? When Jesus comes walking across the tumultuous waters and invites Peter to come out to him on the water, his question to Peter is one that often haunts those of us trying to cross the turbulent sea of life. O you of little faith, why did you doubt? There's something about that question that makes it entirely too easy to make quick and trite answers and assumptions. You just need faith. If you had more faith, you'd get what you'd pray for. If you had a different kind of faith, then your life would be easier and better. If your faith was stronger, you wouldn't doubt, you wouldn't struggle, you wouldn't question. And so I wonder what would have happened if Peter had had more faith, if he had had enough faith, if he had had a different kind of faith. I think we have been predisposed by having heard this story so many times that we expect the usual answer to be that Peter's fear would have disappeared, that the wind and waves would have been of no consequence for him, that Peter would not have sunk below the surface, but instead continue walking on the water. The problem is, though, that it's a dangerous sort of theology. It's a perilous understanding of faith. It says that if we have enough faith, we'll overcome all the storms of life in some spectacular way. It says that with the right kind of faith, we can somehow transcend the laws of nature, the laws of physics, the laws of biology, even defy the laws of gravity. This is the sort of faith that causes well-meaning people to forego necessary medical care because their faith will heal them, even if the miracle of modern medicine is a gift from God as well. I believe God is capable of anything. However, this is not the kind of faith to which I think we're called. This isn't what faith is all about. That sort of faith is more akin to magic than it is to biblical faith. It's the sort of faith that seeks proof and evidence to support our belief. That sort of faith will not carry us through the storms of life. It cannot. Like Peter, will eventually sink like a rock. Maybe it's no coincidence that Peter's name means rock. It doesn't matter how much faith we have. Our bodies are still susceptible to disease. Accidents continue to happen and loved ones continue to die. Despite our faith, life is still difficult. Relationships sometimes end, and we don't always get what we want. No matter how strong our faith is, the seas of our lives still get rough and stormy. Perhaps our usual response to this story is simply wrong. Perhaps faith is not about walking on water at all, but instead about staying in the boat. With a different kind of faith, Peter would have stayed in the boat. Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Maybe Jesus is really asking Peter why he got out of the boat in the first place. After all, it was Jesus who put the disciples into the boat. Jesus is the one who told them to go ahead and to the other side. Jesus is the one who prayed during their night voyage. Jesus is the one who came to them in the midst of the storm. Jesus is the one who reassured them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." It was Peter's idea to get out of the boat, not Jesus's. Peter is the one who wanted to defy gravity, the one who sought some spectacular proof of Jesus's identity, of the presence and power of God. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Peter's words remind us of another story of an earlier time in another place. Satan in the wilderness. If you are the Son of God, command these stones. Lord, if it is you. Peter's faith has taken him out of the boat, and he's put God to the test. Now, I don't say this as a judgment against Peter. I don't say it as a criticism of him. Instead, I say this as one who recognizes something of Peter in myself. I say this as one who wants to walk on the water to escape the storms of my own life. I say this as one who has seen and heard others express the same desire. I think that at some level we've probably all lived with Peter's faith. And to the extent that we have, we need to go on ahead to a different kind of faith. The disciples' voyage across the sea is a passage from one kind of faith to another. It's a journey from a faith used to escape life's storms to a faith that carries us through them. From an external faith of physical presence and proof to an interior faith of spiritual presence. From a faith dependent on the circumstances of our lives to one that experiences Christ present with us, regardless of what's going on around us. In this morning's gospel, Jesus physically separated himself from the disciples and sent them on ahead, but he never left them. Their faith and our faith must now be experienced as something larger than Jesus' physical presence, not limited by the boundaries of what can be seen or heard or touched or understood. Independent of miracles that overcome the laws of nature, Jesus is transforming us from a get out of the boat sort of faith to a stay in the boat sort of faith. And this kind of transformation can only happen in the dark night of our lives. In the midst of the storms happening all around us. When we face storms of every sort, we must decide whether we will get out or if we'll stay in. Faith is not a way for us to escape the winds and waves of life. It's the way through the storms of life. And sometimes faith means staying in the boat and simply rowing. A stay in the boat kind of faith knows that Jesus is always coming to us, that we're never abandoned, that there is no storm that we go through in which Jesus is not with us. A stay in the boat kind of faith never gives up because Jesus never gives up on us. With every storm through which we sail, Jesus comes to us saying, "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." He gets into the boat with us and the winds cease. The fact that we can walk on water is not a miracle. The miracle is that Jesus is stronger than any storm that comes our way. The miracle is that Jesus is in the boat with us. We pass through the storms of our lives into a new shore, into a new life. That, my friends, that's the miracle. Amen.